up, everybody? It's your boy Sai coming back to you another day with asking you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your family and friends across the world. May God bless you and keep you, is our prayer.
Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. When we look at this passage of scripture, where God comes to Abram and requests that he leave his home, there are so many lessons that can be gained through this. I just want to look briefly at how good God is, how wonderful the Lord is, and there were several things in this passage that I just missed throughout the years. I've seen this passage, I've taught this passage, I've even heard sermons on this passage, and not that I'm coming with anything ground-shakingly revolutionary. I'm not changing the text, but I have looked at it in a different way recently. There's been a lot of conversations between me and some other pastors in the area. We've been talking about hospitality and showing goodness towards not only our family and our friends, our church family, but we've been talking about how we should treat well and show hospitality even to strangers. And this particular text, in my opinion, shows so much of how God was so hospitable towards Abram. Let me kind of let you know where I'm coming from. Now, when we start this 12th chapter of Genesis, we don't really have stranger meeting stranger. Often when we have been discussing hospitality, we have a stranger coming into a new area, someone who is unknown entering a town or a village and needs perhaps some shelter, maybe would even sleep outside if no one shows hospitality, but we don't have that in this particular passage. We don't have Abram necessarily being a stranger, and clearly God was not a complete stranger to Abram, for Abram placed his faith in God, at least based on this scripture right away. So I don't know that we're talking about strangers, but what I can say is just as a stranger coming into a strange town or a strange village, at the very least, what God was doing for Abram, someone whom Abram apparently knew of enough to trust, God was now inviting Abram into God's house. Did you catch that? God made the entire earth and the fullness thereof. And so what God has done, instead of inviting Abram into a particular building or a structure to try to show Abram around, here's the bedroom, here's the bathroom, the kitchen, get what you need. No, God was actually introducing Abram to God's house, at least a portion of it. There was no way for Abram to cover all of God's house, but what God was doing was taking Abram out of the familiarity that he had with his home, and God says, no, I've got so much more out there, and so Abram, I need you to trust me, and I want you to get away from what you already know and enter into what I know. Isn't that a wonderful illustration that God is so good, and he's so providential that he is now inviting Abram to leave his house and what he finds familiar and to enter into God's space. It's interesting because when we go to one another's house, all of us have our houses and our homes set up a little differently. All of us, our homes generally come with a kitchen, a bathroom, some bedrooms. Our house has a living room area, a space for people to gather. Perhaps a kitchen area where folks can sit down at a dining table. But we arrange our homes differently. And when people are guests in our homes, often what we do is we serve our guests. We go, and if our guest is thirsty, we go and we get something for them to drink. We know where the cups are, we know where the water is, we know whether to run the water out of the tap or whether we've got a filtration system through a Brita or through our refrigerator. But we have the access to the things to try to make things as comfortable as possible. These are things that someone who walks into our house may not know about. And so what we do is actually, when our guests come in, we provide for them. We make sure they have a comfortable place to sit down. Or at least we attempt to do that. We attempt to make sure that all of their needs are met. If they need to use the restroom, we take them right there. If they need somewhere to lay down, we've got somewhere for them to lay down. We are providing everything that we possibly can to make our guests feel welcomed and to make our guests feel like they belong in our house. That is what a good, hospitable person will do in their home, especially for someone who is a guest the first time around. We're doing all that we can to make sure that they are comfortable. And I love, because we provide for them. And so God, what he does is, in this particular passage where we've read, and he lays out all of these promises for Abram. He tells him that he will show him where he needs to go. He will make Abram's name great. And those who bless him, God will bless. Those who curse him, God will curse. And so God has put all of these wonderful things out here that are promises at the age of 75, and God has to provide for Abram. When he takes them away, in order to make all of these promises true, God must provide for Abram. And I love this because what God has committed to do is, Abram didn't just get up and walk away himself. Abram actually took Lot, and he took his wife, and he took Lot's wife and Lot's son. And so there were some people, and there were flocks and people to work the flocks. All of these folks are going. It's almost like a whole village is leaving, and God is saying, welcome to my home. When we enter into unfamiliar spaces, especially when we're following God, we need to remember that while we may not know where everything is in God's house, God does. And when we have a need, especially when it comes to accomplishing the things that God has set out for us to accomplish, it means that God knows exactly where it is. He knows how to get it to you, and he will get it to you. He will provide for you. I know a lot of times when we think about provision, we think about eating food, we think about having something to drink. These are small things in the house of God. Just like they're probably very small things to provide in your home. And so I get twisted out of shape going somewhere. What am I going to eat? But no, these are small things for God. God has food galore. He can rain down food. He showed us in his word. He can rain down food from heaven. He can provide manna. And then when they complained about not having meat, the Israelites, that is, walking around the desert, mad about the fact they didn't have any meat to eat, here God then provides them so much quail. I like to think that God, that God cooked it for them, They had it barbecued and fried and dyed and laid to the side. They had so much quail that it was going to be coming out of their nostrils. And we also saw the children of Israel walking through the desert, and anytime they needed water, God would provide. What we eat and drink are small things for God. No, when we're talking about provision, I think what we're talking about is God giving us the motivation and giving us the pep talk when we need to move forward in Him. God giving us that confirmation, that word from somebody, some stranger we've never met before, to keep pushing, keep pressing. These are the ways that God provides for us when we will do what He asks us to do. The other thing that God would have to do for Abram, if Abram was going to follow God, which he did follow God, but the other thing that God was going to do in order to fulfill these promises that God gave him, God was going to have to protect Abram as well. When he went into strange lands, when he went into strange places with his family and all of his flock and his herds, his Lot and all of his family, and they're traveling, they look like they've got a lot and they need a lot, and so they may be a threat if they go into a different area where some other people may be living, and so God would have to protect Abram on this journey. And I love it because God showed twice that He cared so much about Abram that He protected even his marriage. He would not allow anybody to defile Abram's marriage, despite what Abram said when he got to the town. Abram at least twice entered into some spaces, and when he got there, he told the people that his wife was actually his sister. And if I'm not mistaken, he wasn't lying, because his father, I believe, was the father for both of them. They had different mothers. But he would go into town, and because he was afraid of the beauty of his wife, because he did not want to be harmed because she was beautiful, what would happen is somebody in power would come and request his sister and then take them back to their home as if she belonged to them. And we're talking about people who presumably were not even following God. God would enter into their room in the middle of the night and let them know, do not mess with this man's wife. God protected his marriage, but God also protected him from hurt, harm, and danger. Dangers seen and unseen. Things that Abram could see coming, whether it be wildlife, whether it be some city that had a problem with seeing him come, God protected him the entire time. And finally, God is doing all of these things. God is taking Abram out of his homeland at the age of 75, where he's familiar with everything. So Abram is having to go out into unfamiliarity, strange places. God is providing for Abram on this journey. God is protecting Abram on this journey. And as Abram walks with God, the allegiance, the covenant is being built and strengthened with almost every step of the way. Oh, I know that may be a little bit, somewhat seem to be a little bit dramatic, but I do want you to know that as Abram traveled, he had to take steps, and every step along the way would cause Abram to walk a little bit closer to God. There was being formed an alliance, a partnership, a marriage, a covenant. One of the biblical covenants, one where if the covenant is broken, somebody dies. This was the type of commitment that was being formed and made every step Abram made along the way, because Abram was learning that God was able to do exactly what God said he would do. And Abram was figuring it out as he was going, that God was a person, a God of his word. He would not fail. That God would be with him the entire time. God would not only call him out of his land, but God would, if he would just go where God said go, God would actually do the provision. God would do the protection. God would make the way for him if he would just take the steps. I'm going to close with this. When the children of Israel got to the Red Sea did not part until the toe hit the water. You've got to make the step, and then God will do and make the way possible. He'll do what he's promised to do, and he will make the way every single time. He hasn't failed. He hasn't failed anybody. If somehow you've missed the boat or the mark, it's not because of God. It has to be because you've misstepped somewhere along the way. When Peter got out of the boat to walk towards Jesus on the water, we find that it was when he took his eyes off Jesus that he began to sink. He started going down. He's sinking. He cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches out his hand. And my brothers and sisters, we've got to trust him. And we've got to take the step. And no matter what the storm looks like, no matter what the terrain looks like, no matter what is in front of us, what may be opposing us, what we find to try to discourage us, because the enemy's out there to do all of those things, God not only has our back, and I sometimes have a problem with God having our back, but God is out in front of us. He's guarding us on the sides. That's the kind of God we serve. So won't you enter into a covenant relationship with God? Won't you do your best to take the steps that God would have you to take? Then you can experience the hospitality of our great, magnificent, wonderful, beautiful King. May God bless you and keep you, is our prayer.
Thank you for joining us today. But before we leave, I'd be asking you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with family and friends. And if it is on your heart to donate to this ministry, the link is in the description below.